Hi, thanks, Emma, and good morning, everyone. Good to see so many of you here today. Some new faces along with some really familiar ones, going back to my university days as well, somebody I've not spoken to for a long time. So welcome to you all. I do appreciate the importance of self-employment to many of our national industries, as my first real job back in the 90s was as a construction quantity surveyor. Where the use of self-employed trades, supervisors, and in fact, quantity surveyors and project managers, so what we might deem as white-collared workers, fulfilled an integral part of our project teams. Therefore, I can say from my experiences then and now that subcontracting definitely still has a place in the world where jobs start and finish, where specialist services are provided but only at certain times, and a number of jobs can carry on at any one time. Flexibility and transient working will continue, and labour resources will, rest assured, will still be needed. That said, and the reason that we're here today, the government are really intent on making some changes that I'm going to be talking about. So now that we've set the scene, let's get started and see what this is all about. So there are three considerations that I want to cover today. One is what is changing in the world of self-employment and subcontracting. The responsibility of assessing the relationship you might have with self-employed workers, or if you are a self-employed worker yourself, you'll be commonly known as self-employed, as the government says, or subcontractors or subbies. Everyone's got their different terminology and names for self-employment. And finally, we want to look at what options you will have at the end of this. Any questions so far? If not, no, let's move on. But before we do, I'm just going to come back to Emma, please. I'd just like to run a poll and just ask everybody how confident you are about IR35. 5 being entirely happy, or sorry, following the poll, so very confident, running down to you needing some help. This is an anonymous, it's easy for me to say, anonymous poll this morning. So we're not checking who's failing or who really needs some help. So be honest with yourselves and put your feelings on this poll, please. Just going to give you 15 seconds. If Emma, you could launch that now, please. Okay, so the results are in, as they say. Clearly, there is some questions still about there, and it's really important that you're here today to hear about what we've got to say. 67% and below, so getting up to 80 odd percent of people are needing some help or not so confident about this. So let's see what this is all about, and hopefully we can swing the tide on this and have some confidence. Greater confidence once we come to the end of this in 20 minutes or so. So firstly, let's define what a subcontract worker is, as they can appear different to us all. They can be known as labour-only subcontractors, self-employed or subbies, as I've relayed to. But the government refer to self-employed workers as a person who's in self-employment if they run their own business for themselves and take responsibility for its success or its failure. The government go further to say someone can be both employed and self-employed at the same time. For example, they can work for an employer during the day and run their own business at night. So it's really important to keep check and keep tabs upon your compliance and your relationships with subcontract workers, or if you are a subcontract worker yourself. Compliance for what, I hear you say? Well, we're heading forward really here into a new territory for the private sector. I'm confident enough to say that you probably deal with subcontract workers on a regular basis to supplement your own workforce, as I referred to in my opening slide, or even to replace direct employment. If we think about construction in particular, but also manufacturing and transportation and courier businesses have all been in the spotlight recently in terms of their relationship with subcontract self-employed workers. Self-employment, as I've said, is common in flexible out of office or out of factory jobs, such as on site or driving. But it's also common for professionals such as contracts managers, designers, and consultants to be self-employed. I come across this such a lot in my day-to-day job of consulting. It's imperative that the circumstances in which each and every subcontract worker is engaged is assessed on its own merits and not as a collective pool, including other self-employed workers. So it really is a case-by-case situation. Just wanted to put this hypothetical situation out and ask the question really, why is industry so keen to subcontract? Yes, it offers flexibility and the opportunity to bring in specialist skills, but often it's looked upon financially from a competitiveness perspective. I hear all the time from my clients that they can't afford to bring people onto the books for various reasons, and one of those is because of the cost of it. HMRC have got something to say about that, as we'll see shortly. So if we look at this modelling, a worker, say an electrician in the construction industry, whose revenue or wage is £40,000 a year, that's not uncommon. For the worker to be self-employed, they're better off by just over £1,000 a year to be self-employed. But you look at the business, and this goes back to what I feel my clients think about competitiveness and affordability. For the business where self-employment is utilised, it's better by in the region of £4,400 in this model, when holidays and pensions and sick pay and training are all taken into account. This can increase costs by at least 10%, and as I say, could have a serious effect on the bottom line, as well as competitiveness. Financially, it's a no-brainer, but this is what IR35 is all about to stop. So just a very quick recap on IR35. It's a set of tax laws which form part of the Finance Act. IR35 first came around, believe it or not, in April 2000, so 21 years ago today, and is properly known as the Intermediaries Legislation. IR35 takes its name from the original press release published by the then Inland Revenue, but as we all know and love them now as HM Revenue and Customs. As we know, these are the people who collect our taxes and enforce these laws. So what changes? From today, the 6th of April, this is the second webinar we've run on this topic in this format, but today I felt it was really important and pertinent that we carried on communicating this message, because from today, these changes to IR35 put responsibility on you as a business owner or a manager or even a self-employed worker to ensure IR35 is being complied with and suitably treated for tax deductions. So why is the government making these changes to enforce this after 21 years? Well, think about the money that's going into COVID at the minute, £280 billion and rising. So the money will need to come from somewhere. That said, it's unfair to say it's a reaction to COVID debt, as this was planned for last year, as it came about in the 2017-2018 Good Work Plan. It was due to be rolled out in April 2020, but was postponed for 12 months because of the coronavirus pandemic. To add to this, the government has recently announced that it will break peacetime record borrowing, aimed or anticipated to be in the region of £355 billion this year. In April 2017, these IR35 changes were enforced within the public sector. So anybody who is self-employed and contracting to the public sector perhaps knows about this and the assessment process that's required. But in 2017, the government raised a further £550 million in new taxes that ordinarily would not have been raised if changes to IR35 had not been made and enforced. So that was the public sector. So what effect is this going to have for the private sector that is largely dependent on flexible working strategies like self-employment or agency workers and 0 hours workers? Think about this yourself. My view is it can be tenfold on that 550 million, raised into 5.5 billion. Still a drop in the ocean of that 355 billion pound of borrowing that's going to happen this year. So let's move on then. The IR35 from today, all medium and large businesses will need to undertake an employment status test for all self-employed workers if 2 out of the 3 following criteria exist. The first of those criteria is that the company has an annual turnover of more than £10.2 million. So that's the money they make in the year, the revenue or the sales. The second criteria is that they have a positive balance sheet value of £5.4 million. And this can include cumulative profits, buildings, plant and equipment, machinery that they own, and can include cars. And the third criteria is that they have 50 or more employees on payroll. So as a business, if you check 2 out of 3 of these, then you're going to fall into the medium and large bracket. But if your company falls out of these criteria and is defined as a small business, it's still worth tuning in and listening to what's got to be said. So this is a portal which the assessment is undertaken on the government website. It's called Complete Employment Status for Tax, or CEST for short. By completing this assessment, a form of contractual agreement is entered into with HMRC. So it must be reflective of the relationship with subcontractors. So be honest with yourself if you are the subcontractor or if you're completing this on behalf of a business. Follow the stages for each subcontract worker, answering the questions honestly and sincerely. Adding incorrect or wrong information at this time could be viewed as a blatant tax evasion, subject to fines and possible imprisonment. CEST analyses the arrangements in place for payment, for invoicing, rights to send somebody else to work, risks for doing the job wrong or out of time, the responsibility for paying for plant and material and equipment, and it looks at who fixes the working hours. Once you've been through the portal and completed the dozen or so fields, then you will be given a result. So keep this result safe for 6 years, as this is the time period HMRC could review your decision making when it comes to subcontract workers. For small companies who engage subcontract workers, they must insist that the workers intermediary, known as the PCS, the personal service company, needs to undertake the CEST assessment. The intermediary could be an individual, it could be a limited company or a partnership. So it's down to them to complete the assessment and provide the results to you if you're a small company. You're going to have done this if you're a large or medium company yourself and will have the results. So it's a good question to ask. Why do I need to do anything if I'm a small company? It's a great point. If you heard of the phase though, if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. You're much better being prepared for your next PAYE inspection by having all your ducks in a row. I can say this with a great deal of experience. Around 2 years ago, one of my clients, who was clearly a small company according to the definition and the criteria, had a PAYE and VAT inspection from the revenue. They were left with a demand to produce the CEST assessment for 4 of its self-employed workers. I did this with them on the portal as it was then 2 years ago. It hasn't changed much. They obtained the results. HMRC revisited and were happy with the results that stipulated that they could keep the workers off payroll, namely keeping them as self-employed. This intervention from HMRC was against the grain, but caused a great deal of anxiety that could have been avoided if businesses are prepared. So as I've said, when we get to the end of this CEST assessment, we've completed the dozen or so fields, we'll get the outcomes. The first outcome could be indicating that the self-employed worker can be classed as off payroll. This indicates that they can carry on subcontracting in the way that they have been. Alternatively, they could be defined as being on payroll, indicating that the assessed worker should in fact be classed as an employee. So what are the options here? Employ them or disassociate your working relationship with them and stop engaging them. It could be determined or defined as undetermined, which really requests a reassessment to go back with better and further information, or to give clarity that may be required from CEST, so run it again. But this is not the usual outcome. If you continue to get an undetermined assessment, then the government expects you to contact HMRC and go through the assessment with them on the telephone. These outcomes give the same consideration for all business sizes. So whether you're a large or a medium organisation and you obtain these results yourself, or if you've requested and insisted that your self-employed workers complete these assessments themselves, these are the outcomes, the results that you're likely to see. You can disagree with the CEST. There's a 45-day period to refer any disagreement with the results to HMRC. But there's no legal obligation here on HMRC to overturn, review and overturn the results. They're not compelled to amend any decisions. It's just good complaints management practice. So just to recap, once you've obtained the results, you can move forward to save or print them. But before you do this, it's really prudent to add some personal information there, such as your name or the company that you work for or engage with, your client's business. Add notes into there about the kind of work you do, just to substantiate the boxes that you've checked on the CEST assessment. I ran through this the other day with a client. One question asked about the subcontractor working for other clients in the last 12 months. Now, that's been pretty tricky because of COVID, and the self-employed worker had not worked for anybody else. So we entered into the box that the reasons for that were that he was limited by the opportunity because of the COVID pandemic. That kind of information is going to be really helpful, important when it comes to substantiating your results when HMRC review them. Coupled with this, you'll need a robust, suitable policy, not only to follow and demonstrate to HMRC that you have a management system in place, but you will need this for qualifications and tenders in the future, rest assured. The government will also expect that off-payroll workers, so those deemed to be bona fide self-employed operatives, will have a written contract for services in place. We can help with this. And from a contractual perspective, this is a good measure to have in place anyway. Okay, so when we ran the first poll, we had some feedback to say that people were not very confident with the IR35 obligations, which have come about from today. So if I can ask Emma again to relaunch the same poll and see how people now feel, same criteria, and let's see if we've cast any light on this tricky subject that's hit us all today. Just waiting for the results. Okay, so we've moved up. We've achieved something this morning, which I'm really pleased to say. So, before we go to a Q&A, and I see some questions have already started coming in. So we'll go. I'd like to thank you all for visiting this webinar today. I'm going to ensure that an IR35 policy to those that register their interest and need for a policy is sent to you. It'll need adapting for your business, but we can talk about that. Happy to have that conversation. And for anybody wishing to discuss the subject matter further or our great range of services, then put a yes in the chat now, and my colleague Emma and Shani will be in touch to arrange a what we call a discovery call. So thank you very much for your involvement so far. So let's go to the Q&A. Feel free to connect to me while this screen is up on LinkedIn to keep up to date with the most current developments affecting employers and businesses. Before we go to the Q&A, let me just say that over the last few weeks, I've had a recurring question about the obligation to share turnover, balance sheet, and staff numbers with labour supply agencies. They're simply doing their job to assess who is responsible for completing the CEST. They're not going to do it if they don't need to. So I think it's legitimate and quite proportionate that they're asking for this kind of information. So, okay. David Allen's put a question, also holidays, etc., plus allowable expenses are all considerations. I think I know where you're coming from there, David, that increase the cost of employment that need to be considered. Okay, thanks. So Leanne has asked, we are a small business of 5 members. We use a self-employed bricklayer on brickwork jobs and sometimes use agency staff when we need to have extra gangs. I think you, Leanne, going through that criteria of £10.2 million turnover and 5.4 million on your balance sheet, you're possibly not going to meet all that criteria for a medium or large organisation. Therefore, I think it's prudent that you're asking your self-employed workers to provide you with assessment that they've done themselves. We at THSP, we've got a couple of consultants that act self-employed. We fulfil the criteria of a small company, and we've asked them to produce a CEST assessment just to be safe on the safe side. Paul's asked, where would completing CEST assessment put you on the radar? So Paul, when you are completing the CEST, you do not put any data into that. You do not put any personal or business information into it. So you're not putting yourself on the radar, but signing that disclaimer on the very first page when you open the CEST is indicating to HMRC that you are fulfilling your obligations to assess the self-employed workers at the time that you're doing the assessment, that should satisfy them with the outcome that you receive from the portal. So no, to answer your question directly, no, it's not putting you on the radar. John's asked a question. I have a small business which delivers electrical contractors to main contractors. I employ 1 labourer and a subby. Again, going back to that, John, our question really goes back to the subcontractor to complete their own CEST assessment. I hope that's helped. There are no other questions. Oh, someone's put into the chat. Let's see who this is. Charlotte's asked a question. The member of our team that would normally undertake the role is actually one that is self-employed. Should we just be checking with them that they have done it? Yes, I strongly recommend that. Also, we have a number of 0 hours workers. Do we need to do assess for these? No, you don't, because they are classed as employees. When they work you deduct the tax and national insurance at the relevant rate for an employee. So 0 hours workers would not fall within this CESS category. Hope that helps. Steve Beck, hi Steve. How do we go about getting a CESS test? As one of my valued clients, Steve, I'll give you a call and we can run through this on a Teams meeting and perhaps do this real time, run through the assessment if we want to arrange that. But the CESS portal, if you Google or go onto Safari, if you've got a Mac device, complete employment status for tax, you will be shown very high in the results, the link to the portal on the government website. Our retained clients within my THSP, we've got a direct link onto that as well. Again, designated as complete employment status for tax. Okay, you're welcome, Charlotte. Thank you for that. So it looks like we've answered all the questions. I thank everybody for coming today. If you need any contact, you can message us directly. Leave a message in the chat now, as Emma and Shani will be downloading those. Otherwise, I'm going to conclude this webinar now. Thank you all for attending. Stay well, stay safe, and hope the lockdown rules come forward and give us a bit more freedom in the next month or so. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.